Hello, my name is Claire Michkowski, and I am a member of the Dole Institute's Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending today's program, presented by the Department of Military History at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. The Dole Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the work of the Dole Institute. We attend regular meetings, assist in events like this, SAB-sponsored program every semester. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you enjoyed today's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. Your attendance and feedback help shape future programming. To view past programs, visit our online video archive at www.doleinstitute.org. A video of today's presentation will be available on our website soon. We'd like to encourage each of you to consider becoming friends of the Dole Institute. Our friends help keep our programs free and open and support archive research and our student activities. Please contact us if you are interested. Before we begin today, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the presentation, we will have some time for audience questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a student helper with a microphone will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Gurgis.
Hello, good afternoon. And this is, I'm not sure how many now in the series. This is the fourth series that the Department of Military History has done. And I think Mark's talk is about the sixth or seventh in here that's highlighting members of our faculty and their recent books or books they have written in the past. And Mark's journey here is not normal. I shouldn't say normal. It's a more unusual one. If you notice his all the letters after his name. He is an associate professor in the Department of Military History. He teaches both criminal law and history courses for us. He's earned his undergraduate degree at the Citadel, where he was a commissioned officer, served as an armor officer in Europe for a number of years. He then got his doctorate from the University College Cork in Ireland, and he got his Juris Doctorate from the Cumberland School of Law. Prior to teaching at CGSC, he was also a criminal prosecutor and served as a brigade intelligence advisor with the Army, U.S. Army's 1st Infantry Division in Iraq in the transition team from 2006 to 2007. His books include the one you're going to hear about today, Irish Secrets, German Espionage in Wartime Ireland. He's also written numerous articles and reviews on various topics, speaks on the Nuremberg trials in particular. And he is also elected as the Fellow of the Royal Historical Society and was named the Instructor of the Year for our department in AY 2015. So, Mark.
Thank you and welcome. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you about a book that is not available yet. Should be a little bit later this year. And this is the woman that it involves. She has about, this is her actual name, Phyllis James. She has about 5 aliases, and I'll tell you about those. She passed away 3 years ago, and I hope to explain to you by the time I'm finished why I'm not terribly upset about that. My first book I did, as Mark mentioned, was called Irish Secrets. And during the course of the research for that, I'd come across the name in a German file of a lady named Nora O'Mara. And she was kind of a passing character. She had done some work in connection with some of the German intelligence agencies, and that was about all I knew about her. And I went back again to the British National Archives about 5 years later, and I discovered that there was a lot more to her than met the eye. And that's the process that started me wanting to get more interested, wanting to find out more about her. I've tracked every piece of paper I think that at least exists with her name on it in German and in English, intelligence archives, criminal archives, and her story is unusual and in some ways almost implausible, but it happened. She's born in 1918. Her mother, unwed mother, it's unclear who her father was. She is adopted in that same year by the family of General Sir Ian Hamilton. Now, you may know General Hamilton because if you know a little bit about the Gallipoli operation in 1915-1916, he was the British commander of Gallipoli. But by 1918, he's retired. He is in his 60s. His wife is age 57. So the idea of having, 1918, 1919, a new child is something a little different. And it seems pretty clear that General Sir Ian Hamilton wanted absolutely no part of this child rearing. Didn't want to adopt the child, didn't want to foster the child. In fact, it's unclear exactly what he did and what she did. Because even though people will throw around in this record the word adoption and fostering, I can't find any record of that. And my suspicion is neither one of those two things was done. Because curiously, when Mrs. Hamilton, at age 57, decided she wanted to have a child, she goes about this in kind of an unusual way. Her first stop is to a friend of hers named Clementine Churchill, Winston Churchill's wife. And Mrs. Churchill at the time was expecting twins, so Mrs. Hamilton approached Mrs. Churchill and asked if she was going to have twins, if she could have one of the two, if she wasn't going to need one of them. And at that point, that didn't happen for, I'm sure, any number of reasons. So there was this child who, again, who was abandoned by the mother. It's taken into the Hamilton home, and that's really where this story begins. Now, at the time that the child was adopted, let me see if I can get this thing to work. I want to give you an impression of General Sir Ian Hamilton. Here's what I want you to imagine. Let's say you are 10 years old, right? Think back. Here's Dad. Maybe. Or not so much. Okay. Dad is, again, by the early 20s, Sir Ian Hamilton is not quite on top of his game. The child is raised for the first 2 years in a separate place with a governess. Lady Hamilton's contact with the child is minimal. And then after 2 years, there's both this child, Phyllis, and there's also another child that comes into the family named Harry. Now, Harry's surname ends up being Knight. That wasn't his original surname. Neither one of them take the Hamilton name. And again, her name, James, is from her birth mother. All right, so that's our starting point. We have Phyllis James and Harry Knight. Mrs. Hamilton seems to have been disappointed quickly with the reality of children versus, I think, what she probably expected to have. So very early on in her diary, we get things like describing Phyllis. She looks sweet but speaks with the most boring drawl at present and a vile accent. She's talking about a 3-year-old child. I'm not precisely sure what she expected at age 3, but apparently it didn't quite live up to the thing. And a little later, when both Phyllis and Harry are about age 8 and a half, she has another diary entry. And she says, I feel terrified by the complete neglect and indifference of the young. I don't think they love me anymore. They're getting drawn into the current and becoming children of this age, and often fear that they will accentuate and not alleviate the loneliness of my old age. I am too old for them, and I don't find the joy I thought I would find in seeing them happy. It's a difficult parent-child relationship, if really that's what it was. It could explain a lot. So you have a child growing up with caregivers that are, in best case, remote. The family's well off. They have several homes. They have a home in London. This is at Hyde Park Gardens on the upper left-hand side photograph. They have a castle in Scotland, and even a third home they actually leased from the Churchills. So there is privilege, there is education, not the formal kind. but there's a disconnect at some level between the children and the parents. It's not that atypical, because there's a lot of strange things going on in family situations in England in the 1920s and 1930s. You may have heard of the Mitford family. The Mitford, the man is the Baron Redesdale. He has 6 daughters and a son. It's an odd family, and by the time the 1930s and early 1940s are over, just the total in his family, they have produced 2 Nazi sympathizers, 3 fascists, an anti-Semite, and a communist. This tend toward uncertainty with the upper classes in England leads a lot of them to extremes. And worse, it leads the children, in some cases, to even more extremes. So whereas you have these sort of expected confines of English society, what the children are going to do are try essentially to go as far as possible from that, and some of the places they end up include Nazi Germany. So in this case, this is Unity and Diana Mitford. That's the picture on the bottom. Unity Mitford becomes very attached to Adolf Hitler. She is kind of in his circle, at least for a little while. She is so devoted to him. She attends the party rallies. She goes with him to coffee. And when England declares war against Germany in September 1939, she is so distraught that she tries to shoot herself. Her sister, Diana, marries Oswald Mosley, who's head of the British Union of Fascists. The Mitfords and the Hamiltons are neighbors, and they know each other. So, middle 1930s, we have this girl who's looking for an identity, and for some reason, she's skipping a couple of steps on the social register. Typically, the debut occurs for young women in this class, and she doesn't have one. Which, again, there's something odd about that. That's one of the program steps that everybody goes through, but she does not, which I think reinforces the idea that she's not actually a member of this family that way. But she expresses a desire to go study in Europe, which is normal. She goes to Germany for a while, and in 1937, she makes the decision, bankrolled by the Hamiltons, that she's going to go study acting in Vienna. So she goes to Austria. She takes a few classes, doesn't have a lot of success with Austrian theater. She does learn German fairly well. She picks up Hungarian. That's going to be important a little bit later. And she's in Germany at the same time that Nazism is growing and spreading. And I think she probably sees this as a chance for a new way out. So when Hitler comes into Vienna in March 1938, she's in the crowd. Clapping and cheering, Hitler goes to the Imperial Hotel balcony, and he makes this speech in front of hundreds of thousands of people in Vienna, and she's there to witness the whole thing. She joins the Nazi theater organization, and this process by which she's detaching from being English and starting to make connections with something else is kind of interesting. And I think she realizes as well that she can't do this with the identity she has. Being an English person, an English-looking person, an English-speaking person in Nazi Germany isn't going to make for a good transition. So starting in at least 1939, she starts to tell people that she is Irish. She isn't. But I think the fact is the Germans can't really seem to tell the difference, because there aren't a lot of them there. So if you say to somebody and you speak in a slightly different English accent to most Germans, they're going to go, oh, okay. And once war is declared in 1939, she combines sort of she's not a great actress, but she's okay, with this fledgling new identity she's got. And once England declares war, most English people are allowed to go home. Some don't. Some work for Hitler, and I think she sees an opportunity. Slightly before the war broke out, sort of completing maybe her identikit, as I like to call it. She spent part of 1938 back in England with her family. This is the last time she was in the country. As far as I can determine, it's the last time she was ever in the country. So in this case, we have the Hamilton grouping here. She is here right beside Lord Hamilton. That is her adopted or stepbrother or adopted brother or whatever the relationship is. That is Mrs. Hamilton here, and Sir Ian Hamilton there. And some interesting things are happening to the Hamiltons as the 30s go on before we get to 1940. Starting back about 1935, the Germans make a pretty concerted effort with the English upper class to try to establish contacts. And they're smart about it. They navigate social divisions. They make overtures to British upper class people with the idea that Hitler is an apostle of peace. He's looking for partners. If your government won't let you do this, perhaps you will have the courage, and they start working sort of almost like a social connections. And there's something formed called the Anglo-German Friendship Association. Ian Hamilton is one of the charter members. He actually is the vice president of the Anglo-German Friendship Association. So in 1938, it becomes, tensions get high. We have the German occupation of Austria. We go to the Czech crisis of 1938, where Germany is demanding that ethnic Germans in the Sudetenland be allowed to return to the Reich, and people are expecting war. So who better to go as an advocate of peace to Germany to diffuse tensions than 79-year-old Sir Ian Hamilton? So he does. He goes to visit Hitler at the Obersalzberg. Hitler's delighted. It's a photo op with the Fuhrer. Hitler actually lends him a toothbrush because he forgot his. They have a meeting, they have a meal, and Hitler, to show his respect for Ian Hamilton, actually puts him on his own plane and sends him back to England with the thanks of Germany in averting an unnecessary crisis. How much this played into Phyllis James is impossible to tell, but I think the certainty is that this is a young girl, she's growing up, she doesn't have an identity, she's surrounded by people that are at least cordial to Nazi Germany. So when word comes, she's in Europe, what does she do next? So then the war starts. She gets a job on the English-speaking service of Nazi radio. British girl on German Nazi radio, broadcasting information back to the British Isles. Now, because she sold the Germans on the fact that she's Irish, which she isn't, they put her on a service called the Irland Redaktion. It is a service aimed at neutral Ireland. And the whole purpose of the German radio propaganda effort is to keep Ireland neutral. Don't let it go to the side of England. It doesn't really matter if Ireland becomes a German ally or not. That's not important. But it's songs and music and stories and emphasizing these close historic ties between Ireland and Germany, and the Celtic culture is really kind of an offshoot of Aryan culture, and it's programming designed with that in mind. So she appears on several of these programs. She's never a star. She's a bit player. But the effort to broadcast propaganda back to Ireland brings her in contact with a second orbit of people, and that's the German intelligence service, who use the propaganda broadcast in one sense, but because she has sold them that she is not only Irish, but that she was raised by upper-class English people, she knows everything about England. She knows all these people. She knows Churchill. She and Churchill used to hang out. Not so much, but if you're a German intelligence guy and you're desperately looking for information about England, this is starting to sound pretty good. So they're not going to send her as an agent back to Ireland. And Germany has kind of an interesting tradition here, too, with radio broadcasting. You may have all heard of Axis Sally, right? Here's the beautiful thing about radio. You don't actually get to see any of the people that are talking. And in the minds of GIs especially, in the minds of British soldiers, Axis Sally looks probably something a lot like this. You want to see the real Axis Sally? I fooled you. But all of these people, and there's William Joyce, Lord Haw-Haw, and Axis Sally, and there are a number of others, and they sort of occupy this twilight line between people who have betrayed their identity, betrayed their country, and now they're trying to find a place in Nazi Germany. All of them work for some degree for the German intelligence service, providing information. And when the possibility of an invasion of England seems credible in the summer of 1940, who better to ask for advice than somebody who has been among the English upper classes, who claims to know Churchill? She abandons her English passport. She's given what's called a Fremdenpass. It's a passport for foreigners that don't have Reich citizenship. And the first mission of any consequence that she is attached to as part of this German intelligence system operation is a plan in 1940 to take a former Luftwaffe lieutenant named Hermann Goertz and parachute him back over Ireland in an effort to contact the IRA. We could go on about the Goertz thing for a while because actually it's almost comically bad what happens to him. For some reason he has concluded he needs to parachute into Ireland in full German uniform. He's dropped 50 miles from his drop zone, and so he hikes. And they had given him some invisible ink that was concealed in his shoulder pads of his jacket, except when he crosses the river, he forgot about that, and the ink just dissolves. He goes to a place called Pulo Fuka on the way to Dublin, and he goes into the police station and asks for directions, wearing his Luftwaffe uniform. You can only imagine how well this whole thing went. In any case, Goertz ends up in jail in 1941. She then attaches herself to an Irish expatriate named Francis Stewart. He's the guy on the bottom right-hand side here. Stewart's an interesting guy. He's a poet. He's a fairly good writer. He'd come to Germany in 1940 sort of with IRA backing, and he had a job at Berlin University. And he works for the radio service, and he helps German intelligence. And I think she probably latches on to Stewart to try to have him be her teacher in all things Irish, because he's for real. He really is Irish, and she's really not. So in the process of this, she takes a pseudonym that she got used on the radio for these kind of comical, lighthearted, broadcasts back to Ireland. So she goes from Phyllis James, her family had called her Rosaline, and her new name is now going to be Nora O'Mara, the pseudonym for the radio. There are two German documents that use that this is now going to be her new official name in Germany. So the old name, Phyllis James, gets discarded, and she's never going to use it again. So now, at least for the wartime purposes, it's going to be Nora O'Mara. She gets involved in another scheme where, if you're trying to sort of ratchet up the level of her treason, she goes with Francis Stewart and an IRA guy that's sort of wintering in Germany during the war named Frank Ryan, and they go to a POW camp in an effort to recruit ethnic Irish prisoners for a German unit. Think about this. It's like in World War, maybe the Vietnam analogy. Okay, you go to the Hanoi Hilton, an American, think Jane Fonda perhaps, and you're trying to recruit American POWs to serve in a unit under North Vietnamese command to fight against the Americans. And it fails miserably. I mean, it's another one of these horrible, stupid German farces. But the fact that she's able to do it, so she's working for Hitler, she's working for Hitler's intelligence service, she's broadcasting on Hitler's radio, she's trying to recruit Irish prisoners to fight on behalf of Hitler against her own people. And she's just kind of bouncing around from one thing to the other. It's unclear because there are significant gaps bless you, in time that I can't figure out what she's doing with whom. There is an interesting incident that occurs in April 1945. A German SS general named Hermann Fegelein, he is Heinrich Himmler's adjutant to Hitler's bunker as Berlin collapses. Now, as the Russians encircle Berlin and everybody is trying to get out who can get out, one day Hitler notices that Fegelein is not at the staff conference. That's bad. So they go looking for him. They find him in a hotel room in Charlottenburg in Berlin, and he is with a woman. And the surviving SS who write a report about Fegelein's capture, and they're later going to shoot him, report that the woman was someone who was pretending to be Irish, that she was an actress, that she knew some Hungarian, and they never see her again. She just mysteriously vanishes when they arrest Fegelein. I don't have a piece of paper that says so, but it's her. I mean, how many Faco Irish people no. Fegelein, by the way, married to Eva Braun's sister, Hitler's wife, and that is the last photograph of her in wartime Germany from 1945. In the meantime, while the war is progressing, and starting in 1943 and 1944, British intelligence, MI5, has started maintaining a dossier on her. And in 1944, the British come up with something that's called the Renegades List. Britons who have betrayed their country and gone to work for the Nazis. She's number 96. And there's a list that goes out to all commands that if you come across this person, if you apprehend them, you put a hold on them for British intelligence, and presumably the reception you're going to get in England isn't going to be the one you're probably going to like. She's arrested, she's taken to Paris, she's interviewed by MI5. At that point, something almost miraculous happens. There's a cable sent from 5 headquarters to the British liaison office in Paris that says, let her go, and destroy any other information you have in this file. And they do. And she goes free. And I don't know why. It could be because Ian Hamilton is still alive. He dies in 46. It could be because they're getting ready to put on trial and hang a guy named Leopold Amory, whose father is the Secretary of State for India, one of Churchill's friends too. And they don't want the bad publicity that another child of a prominent English family has gone rogue and betrayed their country, and we may have to hang her. But no charges are ever brought. She violates the Treason Act in every way you can violate it in English law, and she's let go. But now we have her. She's persona non grata in England, so she's not going back there. She stays in occupied Germany for a little while, and we're about ready to start tinkering with her name again. Because remember, the identity that she had, the one that she's been working on here for three or 4 years, is this Irish persona. Except she's missing some key pieces of it. But she decides this is the one that's going to carry her into the post-war period. So instead of now being before the adopted child of Ian Hamilton, she's now going to discard that whole Hamilton part. She'll never talk about that again. She's now Nora O'Mara. She's Irish. She worked in Germany during the war, but only on Ireland's behalf. She's kind of an Irish patriot, if you want to look at it that way. So in the immediate post-war period, she acts in a couple local German theater productions. The picture on the left-hand side is a picture of her from one of these programs. She then, in the early 1950s, goes to Ireland itself. Now, I can prove that she was there for one time in the 1930s for about 4 days. That's as close as she got to, be like her St. Patrick, reunion thing. But now she takes this as a cause. This is part of who she needs to be. So she starts taking language in Irish Gaelic. She starts hanging out with Irish nationalists. She starts reading, there's a subculture in Ireland then and now, and there are a couple things that are bound together. There's a particular reading of Irish history. The Irish language itself is kind of a badge of nationalism, so she's got to learn that, and she's got to discard inconvenient parts of her past to fit in. So she becomes a refugee. She becomes an Irish person who's just kind of brushing up on their heritage and their language skills. And she then takes this one step further and decides to go to the Aran Islands off the coast of Galway and kind of get back to her Irish roots that are imaginary, but that's what she says. So she starts working with a folklore group and an Irish heritage group and local Aran Islanders, and she wants to build an Irish heritage museum on the islands. The Arans are incredibly remote. There is some settlement there, but not a whole lot. They make terrific sweaters. They fish. And she gets funding because after World War II, this Irish nationalist thing just takes off in a huge way, and there's money available for different cultural projects, and she gets some of that money. The problem is that she's trying sort of to push the locals in a direction they're not really excited about going. In other words, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, look, I need you to embrace your heritage, and I'm going to help you out with that. So we're going to wear folk costumes and do a lot of sing-alongs and a lot of, you're going to thank me later for this. And it just doesn't quite take off, but it does put her in contact again with the sort of people in the Irish revival or Irish nationalist movement that are going to like her and help her as she becomes more Irish as she goes along. She needs a new name, though, because Nora is not really going to get her there. It's just too English sounding. So, new name, this is at least version 3. She's going to go back to the pet name she got as a kid, which was Rosaline. She's now going to Iricize that and start calling herself Roisin O'Mara. New name, new persona, new language skills, new political direction, new friends. And that is the sort of the course she's going to keep on. Starting in the early 1970s, she's going to go through one more name change. Because frankly, O'Mara doesn't really sound Celtic enough. It does, but it's an anglicized Celtic. So she now wants to be called, and actually, I think, I don't know, I can't prove she had her name officially changed, but she's now going to be Roisin Ní Mhara. That's awesome, because if you look at like spelled Irish, it's M-H-E-A-R-A. The M-H is like a W sound. And she believes that is her true name. This is her opening the museum with the Minister for Irish Culture. And if the thing had stopped here, nobody would have heard of this, and nobody would have cared, and it wouldn't have gone anywhere. It would have been just another blip on a very small radar screen, and I certainly would not have spent God knows how much time tracking the stuff. But it doesn't stop there. Because in 1991, she publishes an autobiography. It's in Irish. A lot of the people that read it think it has a remarkable similarity, the way the words are phrased, to some other Irish writers. But it's under her name, and it purports to be her life story. So it goes back and talks about her Irish roots and her love of Ireland. And if I had $1 for every time in there the phrase "we Irish," "us Irish," appears, it would just, I could retire tomorrow. Now, the thing is, the book is one of these things, too, that nobody really would have cared about, because she's not a mover and shaker. She doesn't make policy decisions. She didn't win the war. She didn't do any of that stuff. She's nobody anybody ever would have a reason to hear about. Except when you start, like, where she's talking about the 1930s, and her language is very complimentary, affectionate even, when talking about Adolf Hitler, and about how he had a vision, he had a clear vision, and it wasn't his fault that things went the way they went, that he was stopped at every turn by monsters like Churchill, who couldn't appreciate the good he was trying to do. Hitler is misunderstood, and it goes on and on and on. And then she gets into this imagined section almost of the post-war period where she says she's talking to a survivor of the concentration camps who tells her something that she had known for quite some time. And that is that the concentration camps are a myth, that the Holocaust never happened, that sure there were deaths in the camps, but it wasn't due to anything, any bad intentions or bad things that Hitler or the Nazis did. So I want to share a couple of quotes with you. She says, speaking of the camps, a lot of the prisoners were criminals and only a few were Jews. The main cause of death in the camps was typhus, and that disease only hit in 1945. She says, because remember she lived in Vienna in the 1930s, she says, as regards to the city of Vienna, this powerful minority, the Jews, now had to pay for the dissatisfaction of the people. They deserved what they got. So the 90,000 Jews that lived in Vienna in 1938, of whom 70,000 were exterminated, was certainly not the fault of Nazi Germany. And in speaking of this sort of revisionist view of European history, she says it's important to keep in mind fairness and balance and the fact that Germany lost the war. And in her words, it's not right to hit somebody lying on the ground. It is not right to judge the person that didn't have a chance to defend his case. You know, there are two sides to every story. So before you buy off on this Holocaust thing, you need to be more deliberate about this. This is one of her best. There's plenty of evidence that the Germans did their serious best to solve the Jewish problem humanely. The rules against Jews were put into effect in Germany in order to keep the inordinately tight influence that the Jews had on the country in the post-war years in check. So here's the thing. This book, whose name I will not, if you want to have some fun with Irish language. And I will give them all the money in my pocket to anybody who can pronounce the title of this book correctly. A lot of interesting vowel combinations and accent marks, and don't even try it because it's going to mess you up. This book comes out in 1991, and what do you suppose the reaction is? They love it. Love it. It's awesome. Irish nationalists, IRA side, people cannot praise this thing enough, because it's an Irish woman writing about these hard truths of Irish history. She is a kind of a pioneer. And weirdly enough, the Irish government pays a £4,000 grant to the publisher because the book is published in Irish, and that's what you do to encourage Irish literature. So you have a Holocaust denier who likes Hitler, who is pretending to be Irish, but she's really English, that worked for the Nazis during the war, and the reaction in 1991 is, this is a real treasure. I am astounded by that now, just like I was then. The idea that anybody who could actually read it, because it was not published in English, would read the words and say anything but, we should probably put you on trial, I don't understand, but that's what happened. Now, she writes another book about 10 years later, and it's to pick up with the story of her life, also in Irish, from the post-war period through the 1990s. There's a lot she leaves out. It's apologetic. She doesn't really deal with the Nazi stuff so much, really hardly at all. She has 2 children during the war that seem to come out of nowhere, and it's unclear who the fathers were, what the circumstances were there. She is a very, in some ways, she's a very smart person because she really does know which keys to press in that group where she wants to live to get approval. One of the friends that she has, I'm sorry, let me go back here a few minutes, is the Archbishop of Armagh, Cardinal O'Fee, and they're friends largely because he is an Irish language scholar, and she's a person that is tripping over herself to be established in the Irish-speaking community. So she works at his library a little bit. He supports her somewhat. His politics are kind of IRA, nationalist, that direction. But he didn't really live long enough to have an opinion about what she wrote about World War II and the Jews. So here's the thing, and this is almost an amazing thing. She dies in 2013. At one point, I had arranged through her son to interview her. And I think then they found out who I was, and that didn't happen. But she dies in 2013. Amazingly, this is remarkable, she publishes a book about 2.5 years later. I wish I could figure out how to do that, because I think that's just amazing. The book is an English language version of her 1991 memoir with some editing. So she leaves most of the comments in there about how great of a guy Hitler was and how the Jews, and it was really typhus, and it wasn't Holocaust, and all these other things. But there's some very careful edits going between the Irish and the English version that soften some of the passages a bit. That's out there now. It was self-published. The company is Ex Libris. I don't know who paid for it. I don't know who did the editing on it, except I'm reasonably sure she did not, because she's been dead since 2013. The reason that I think this makes a difference, this story at all, because again, this is not somebody who made important decisions. This is not somebody who did any of the things that we know people from the 1930s or 1940s or 1950s. But it's astounding to me that in 2016, or 1991 for that matter, that somebody can say things that are so demonstrably evil and untrue and not be pilloried for this in public. But you can. If you're picking the right audience, if you're saying it the right way, if I don't know what even the magic is to make this work, except when I'm reasonably certain about there's something smart in the way that she did this that combines 2 things that I think are almost uncombinable otherwise, which is the Holocaust denial movement, which is bigger than you think it is, and this sort of fantasy fairy notion that people have about Irish nationality and Irishness. And she does it remarkably well. She pretends to be one of them until she is accepted as one of them, in which case she can spew this stuff out almost without any censure whatsoever, because everybody is so excited that she's this active, energetic, committed member of neo-Irishism. And I think that's an interesting statement. Psychologically, I'm drawn to the idea of why somebody would feel the need to keep doing this, to shift from who you are or what you are, to go with people that you know are evil, to keep morphing and being this chameleon-like figure from one thing to the other. I've got little glimmers of there in here, I think, of why, what I think she's thinking about at the time, but I'm not completely sure. All I know is there was an end that she has in mind. It's a careful, deliberate plan, and she's very careful to stay away from the people that would know better. because there's a couple of instances where, like even in wartime Germany, she runs across an actual Irish person who's not one of her friends, and it's pretty apparent right away that she's trying to pull a fast one. So she'll pull back, she'll reconsider, she'll repackage, go in a different direction, and eventually for her, at least, I guess it works. But it is, I found it an interesting story to write about. We'll see if anybody thinks it's an interesting story to read about. But I think the issues that it raises were at least kept my mind occupied. And that's why I was not terribly, heartbroken when she passed away in 2013. Because she remained, until the day she died, an unrepentant Nazi. Now, the plan is, the book should be out shortly. The premiere for the book is going to be at City Lights Bookstore in San Francisco. You were all invited. If you get there, go down to Moe's Grill on Grant Street. Tell them you know me, and we'll have some burgers and we can talk about it. And if you have any questions at all, I would love to entertain them and answer them if I can. Yes, ma'am.
As you're talking, I'm struck by dozens of questions about her psychological makeup. And what immediately came to my mind, and I just like you to react to it, was, I can't recall the name, but it was the woman who feigned being a black woman.
Oh, Rachel Dalziel, yeah.
And, and I was convinced that the woman believed what she was not. And I'm just wondering to what extent that desire, in your impression, that desire to create family and being was such that she created a fantasy and carried it to the extreme, or what's your psychological read on her?
As a non-practicing, a non-qualified psychologist, I've given a lot of thought to that, and I would be willing to bet that up until the time she died, she probably would have been able to pass a lie detector on any of the stuff that she said. It's not true. She lies. But I think after a while, I think there's probably a turning point maybe in like 1945, 46, when because there's so many things before that where it's obvious she's been caught out, and she changes, and she gets caught out, and she changes. But after that point, I think she really believed every bit of the stuff she was saying. She really believed she was Irish. She really believed she was working in the best interests of Ireland. I ran this by a friend of mine who's a psychologist, who's smarter about this than I'll ever be. And the diagnosis, just on the facts that I gave, was a narcissistic personality disorder. This is somebody who, essentially that core of when we're children and we're teenagers and we're trying to figure out who we are, what's our self-identity. Hers was just in kind of floating, because she didn't know who her father was. She had no contact with her mother. The Hamiltons were, I think, not optimal caregivers. And I think she just went searching. And she went searching in a lot of really bad places. And so when that starts to coalesce, and when you get a sense of your ego, I don't think it's terribly surprising she ends up with one that's just completely aberrant and very bad. But yeah, that's puzzled me, honestly, for a long time now.
She lies, and we know she's a liar. Does she ever, my question is, what motivates her to lie? Does she ever benefit? I think we see her benefit from the book she writes about the lies of Nazi Germany, and that's a big lie, and she does profit from that financially. Is there early on she's lying for profit or to benefit in any certain way, or is she just lies for the sake of lying, and that stimulates her?
I don't think the motive was ever profit. I think the motive is positive attention. And that's the whole point about breaking into this new club, okay? If she can successfully do this, if she can be respected and liked and included, I think she's getting affirmation that she probably never had anyplace else. That's just the course she picked. I mean, you know, she could have gone any number of other different ways, but I think the real thing was somebody liking who she was or admiring who she was, and I don't think it ever was about dollars. I have to go where Mike goes.
Yeah, I have a question.
Right back.
Did she continue to benefit from the Hamilton money?
She was excluded from Lady Hamilton died early, and she was excluded from that will. Lord Hamilton did try to pass money through her a couple of times while she was in Nazi Germany, and had this really circuitous route of trying to get the money to her. It wasn't much. It's 100 pounds. It's 50 pounds. It's something like that. But I think there was probably, and it wasn't recorded either in Hamilton's work or Lady Hamilton's diary. I think there was a decision made. Look, we're just going to cut her off. So.
In the German archives, is she found as a German spy?
Sure. And in the British intelligence files, she is a German spy. Because when they're still building their case against her, they've interviewed German intelligence personnel. She gets there's a weird grant she gets in 1943 directly from Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister.
Is that in the Abwehr records as well as the SS?
Yes, sir. Well, not the SS records, because we don't even have the SS intelligence files were destroyed. This is Abwehr stuff or Foreign Office, German Foreign Office.
When her book was published in English, how was it received among the English people?
It came out, this new one came out a month and a half ago. I can't find where anybody's reviewed it. If I get some time, I plan to. It's not going to be 4 stars. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that she had a son or children, and that you were going to have an interview. Did you ever receive any other materials? Do they not like you, or photos or anything?
I will tell you a weird story, because when I was trying to set this thing up, her son is a lawyer in Vienna. The daughter just seems to have, I can't find any trace of the daughter, but I had some email exchange with the son, and I said, look, one of the things I found while I'm researching this is I found a really old picture of your mom. So,
Can they give any insight on?
well, here's what I learned, and the only way I heard anything back. When this book is published about a month and a half ago, right? One of the photographs included in it is the one that I sent her, this one, that she'd never seen before. And she neither credits me, which I don't find surprising, but I'd also told her I got it from the British National Archives, and of course God knows she's not going to credit the British for anything. But it's, yeah, as soon as I think they realized I think what happened is they probably went back and read my other book, and at that point it was like I was talking to a wall, and there was no way they were going to cooperate in any way, shape, or form. And you know, I was kind of looking forward to it. I was hoping the book was going to come out while she was still alive, and they would sue me for libel, because that'd be like just the coolest thing ever, you know, to have a libel trial. Uh-oh.
Can you tell the story how did you find this story?
No, well, like I said, I came across the name researching the other book, and it was just a trip to the British National Archive, and I started looking through the intelligence files. They're gradual. All of them, MI5 files are almost all released, but not entirely. So you have to keep checking back. And checking back with her file does not exist, but the way the system works is if, for example, I'm using a document, it's copied maybe to 5 different files. So her dossier, gone, but the files that were in her dossier, if you kind of know where to look for it, you can start piecing these back individually, one document at a time. Yes, ma'am.
When did she go to the Aryan Islands?
56.
Okay, so what I'm wondering about, what, did she get involved with the IRA at all, with all the troubles that were going on? And I mean, it would seem like a logical thing that she would, except for the fact that she stayed on those islands.
I think it's more likely she was certainly in contact with people that had contact with people in the IRA. If you think of it like a really huge extended family, there are people that are fascinated by Irish language and culture that have, 99% of them have absolutely no connection with radical anything. They're scholars, they're linguists, they're cultural historians, they're regular historians. And I think for her point of view, she had to ingratiate herself with people that are pushing the Irish language movement. And there is some crossover. She never became political in that way, and I think part of the reason is, too, that would get her the kind of attention that might expose the rest of the story. So she was never going to run for office. She was never, and weirdly, like in the 1950s, she was interviewed on the Aran Islands by a reporter, and they asked her where she'd come from. And at that point, she hadn't quite mastered the language, and she hadn't quite gotten some of the other pieces, so she tells one reporter that she's Swiss. She tells another reporter a couple months later she's French, because it's not formed yet. You know, she's not ready, I think, to go all the way and try to, hey, I'm Irish. But she's getting closer.
Where's the sweet lady? Just for psychological balance. The New Atlantic has an article diagnosing Donald Trump as a narcissistic personality. So it's not that phenomenal that somebody thinks she's a narcissist. But she's obviously psychologically caught up in the movement. And she'll do whatever she needs to do to get the validation that Hitler gave her and the movement gave her and the 100,000 people at the speech gave her.
Yeah.
So she's a very plastic personality. Beyond that, I won't diagnose.
Anybody else? Thank you, seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your kind attention.
Years ago, there was speculation that the actor Errol Flynn was a Nazi agent. As I said, that is not factable.
Nah.
No evidence for it.
No, whatsoever. I heard the same thing. It's been a long time since I heard that, but I have heard that.